Is office real estate dead? What can we expect in the future for office and really lots of other areas of real estate as well? There's just been so much uncertainty with the pandemic from 2020 and into 2021. We have all this government stimulus and government backstopping of the real estate market. Lots of uncertainty to say the least, and office is no exception. This is also during a time where people are working from home, myself included, among many others, especially in white-collar jobs that would typically be the main demand for office space, especially in downtown areas. Well, last week on Friday, I participated in the second episode of this new YouTube channel I'm a part of called Punch Card Investing. It's a value investing show. I definitely recommend you guys check it out if you're at all interested in stock investing and value investing in particular. In that episode, we were talking about our favorite investors, and during my portion of that segment, I was talking about Sam Zell, and we were talking a little bit about office and the future of office there. So I'll go ahead and show you this clip, and we can kind of use that as a springboard talking about what the future of office might hold by looking at Sam Zell's perspective on the issue, since he's been in and around the game for quite some time, still is. Equity Commonwealth is a company that I'm invested in, which currently holds a couple office buildings and then a ton of cash on the side. So it's interesting to see what Sam Zell might think, seeing as though he is really a master of the office space, if there is one. So here's the clip. Brad Kellner is the one who asks a question about Zell's perspective on office. I give my short answer here, and then I'll go a little bit deeper after this once we watch this clip. So I wouldn't call him a market timer, but that's kind of how it's ended up working for him in when he happens to sell his deals. It's not like he was predicting the 2008 crash when he did that, but he said that he got an offer he couldn't refuse, which makes sense since things got so euphoric. He doesn't get caught up in the euphoria is probably the best answer.
What is Sam Zell's current position on the office space, that environment? Is he pretty firm on that, or is he branching out into other sectors? What's he doing?
He's not super stubborn, but yes, he is bullish on office long term, even downtown office, which has obviously been hit hard this year. Well, revenue wise, it's been fine, but a lot of offices, especially in the U.S., are still like largely empty downtown, and he has major concerns that there's been a huge oversupply of office buildings in the last 20 to 30 years. So he has concerns there, and he's looking at other areas in real estate as well. The only one he's been really out against has been retail. He calls it a falling knife. So he's trying to stay away from that. But he is not net bearish on office. My guess is he's waiting for something to happen to the office market so he can get those below replacement cost deals, since he really does believe that working from home on a broad scale isn't super effective. He's very much into the social environment of working, because that's how he's run his companies. So he is pretty bullish on office, generally speaking, but he's not going to overpay for office. That's his general approach. So that's a very high-level overview of the issue, but I thought it'd be good to actually get Sam Zell's perspective explicitly from the man himself. This video is actually from the Salt Talks channel. This was an interview that took place back in July of 2020, so a bit of a while ago, but still right in the midst of the pandemic when things were still very uncertain. Things now, I would say, are still very uncertain for the future of office in particular, seeing where remote workers go, but here's Sam Zell's actual words on the issue. And yes, the person asking the question is the mooch.
So let's switch over to office space then. What's your opinion of office space and both the suburban markets and the, sort of the 24/7 cities?
There's been a lot of discussion about the 24/7 cities. People have talked about it as though as a passing, phase. I totally disagree with that. I think the 24/7 cities will suffer somewhat, but they're not going away. People are not going to move to Keokuk, Iowa from New York City just because they can remotely connect to their job. We're social animals. We want to work together. Nobody's figured out a way to motivate by modem. We've done very well by operating office space and businesses remotely. But it's very important to remember that we've done so because we're operating with a bunch of people that we know, that we trust, and that we have expectations. If it were 5 years from now and there'd been a 25% turnover in in people working, we would be sitting here trying to do a remote problem, not really knowing or trusting the people at the other end of the phone or the end of the Zoom. And so when it's all said and done, we may end up with a scenario of 4 days a week. We may end up with a scenario of lack of concern about working from home for a day. But when it's all said and done, if you want to run a business and you want to be successful, you need to create contact between the people. And that's what office space provides.
So I'm going to pause it right there. This is kind of part one of a two-part answer. He goes into more of the potential drawbacks with office in the next part. But as for this sort of bullish case on office, maybe this is kind of an old school kind of perspective. It's an old school sort of, we need the social element of working in person, face-to-face has value, and I wouldn't really discount that too much. It does make a lot of sense, and it's the reason that office came about in the first place. We do better as humans when we work together with other people and when we can create that connection. It's not that the connection can't be created virtually, but it's very hard. I think it's a compelling case that Sam Zell makes, and certainly would be a driving force for the office market in the future. Because let's be clear, even if we have way more virtual working than before, we're not getting rid of all office. There's still going to be a significant portion of stuff that can't be done virtually, or at least as effectively. If not, most things can't be done virtually, at least very effectively. So that would create demand for office. The question is, how much can actually be outsourced to virtual sort of working, or even outsourced period to other countries and not even within the US where everything is done remotely. So there are questions there for sure. And that kind of leads into the second part of the answer.
Now, having said all of that, even before the virus, I believed that we had a significant oversupply of office space in America. We didn't see it because we had assets like WeWork, taking up space like there was no tomorrow, because they didn't intend on paying tomorrow. But they took up a lot of space and in effect created an environment where people didn't understand that we're building a lot of stuff, a lot of new buildings, Hudson Yards, and it's Hudson Yards is 14 million square feet. There's another 5 million adjacent to it, and Steve Roth has got a giant project, above Penn Central Station. That's a lot of space. We have a similar situation in Chicago where we've had 4 or 5 new office buildings. They've emptied out the old buildings, and we don't have tenants for those old buildings. So I think the office space business is likely to suffer from oversupply, but an oversupply kind of similar to previous periods of oversupply, as opposed to something dramatic like everybody working from home.
So I just want to clarify that, because it could be kind of easy to miss if you're not too familiar with Sam Zell's sort of track record. But he is very firm on the perspective of the supply and demand curves of real estate, really focusing on supply especially, since real estate, like many other markets, has booms and busts, especially commercial real estate, where often people will get euphoric about a particular sector. In the past, it has been office, where there's tons of new space that comes online, but that's too much space to go around, even during normal times. Now, you could argue that there's just going to be a lot less demand for the future. Sam Zell doesn't really think that's going to be the case, but that doesn't mean he's going to ignore the massive supply that's come online that doesn't necessarily have tenants to begin with, and that is going to be a serious growing pain, or perhaps a shrinking pain, I guess, for the office industry in general. But that's not very different than another boom and bust cycle. It has less to do with that sort of fundamental shift that a lot of people are suggesting with people working from home permanently. And that would explain why Sam Zell can say these things about office being important in the future, but simultaneously is not throwing all of his money into office buildings right now. He's largely staying on the sidelines, waiting to make another purchase, ideally below replacement costs. That's kind of his sort of approach to real estate. He tries to get things below replacement costs, so that way he always has a competitive edge over his competitors, because you can't build below replacement costs. Replacement cost, for those of you unfamiliar with real estate, is simply the cost to actually build a new building. So if you can buy a building below replacement cost, no new builder can come in and beat you on that price. So you always are kind of insulated in that way. So I really like Sam Zell's approach to real estate. It's sort of that value investor lens applied to real estate specifically, trying to get something below its intrinsic value, in this case, the costs to actually build it. But we haven't seen a major downward move in office real estate, or really any real estate for that matter, besides maybe hotels and some retail, which have just had massive shifts thanks to lack of demand, super low occupancy. That's terrible, obviously. But in office specifically, vacancy on paper is actually quite low in that tenants are still often paying their rent, but there's no one in the space at the moment, and a lot of them have listed it for sublease in many markets. So that is what is raising a lot of red flags in the short term, in that you have a lot of companies that clearly are trying to offload their office space, but might still be paying the bill. So it looks like you're fine on paper, but just focusing on the amount of rent actually paid right now might ignore the fact that many of these companies won't want the office space in the fairly near future once their leases expire, or if they're able to work out a deal with their landlords to change their lease. So in all, I would definitely echo what Sam Zell would say. In my humble opinion, it seems like office should do okay in the long term. It has bigger problems, in Sam Zell's view at least, that supply is a much bigger issue than the actual demand sort of shifting long term from the work from home threat, if you want to call it that, in this situation. The fact there's just been so much office built in the recent past is a much bigger factor in Sam Zell's view than this threat of actually working from home. So I wouldn't say office is doomed, but it could be going through a pretty rocky period in the near future. It seems like Sam Zell would think that, in that he has all of his cash ready to deploy on a deal, but has not yet deployed it because he can't find that great deal yet, or at least not one that's big enough to move the needle for his REITs. Anyways, I hope this was informative and at least got you thinking a little bit differently about the office market, especially if you've been seeing all the headlines about how office is totally doomed and will never potentially recover, and this is the paradigm shift, and certainly that is a possibility. We're probably going to see some effect on demand. I just don't know how big it'll be. Sam Zell seems to think it won't be very big at all. Some people think it'll be humongous and transformative like it has been in the short term. Long term, we'll see what happens. This has definitely tested a lot of companies to see how they can handle things remotely. They can cut down on expenses with office space. I'm sure many would do that, but Sam Zell would definitely argue that productivity might suffer, and that would affect the bottom line too. We'll see what happens, and I'll be sure to cover it in any event. But if you like this video, then definitely like it, since that would help the channel out a lot, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any new content, since I put out new videos every single week about real estate, personal finance, investing, all that great stuff. So be sure to subscribe. And like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, definitely check out Punch Card Investing, the new channel about value investing that I'm doing with a few other YouTubers. Definitely go check that out, where we have a lot of fun talking about all sorts of things with value investing and answering a lot of viewer questions at the same time. So definitely go have a look at that. I'll include a link in the description. But until next time, take care.